La 10
The 10,193rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Yemen to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Khaled Kiari, Assistant Secretary General, Departments of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs and Peace Operations, as well as Mr. Indrika Ratwate, Acting Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Khaled Kiari.
Monsieur le Président,
President.
developments in Yemen are a stark reminder that there is no alternative to an inclusive, Yemeni-owned political process. A negotiated political settlement reached through dialogue under the United Nations auspices can provide a durable and sustainable resolution to the conflict. On 3rd of July 2026, an Iranian aircraft reportedly traveled from Tehran to Sana'a International Airport before returning to Tehran. This flight reportedly transported, among others, a Houthi delegation to attend the funeral of the late Supreme Leader of Iran. The government of Yemen, in its letter dated 6 July, addressed to the President of the Security Council and the Secretary General, viewed with deep concern this flight as a violation of its airspace and the sovereignty of Yemen. Today, additional concerning developments took place. Another Iranian plane carrying a Houthi delegation returning from Tehran reportedly landed at Hodeidah Airport. This followed reports of airstrikes at Sana'a International Airport, which the Houthi attributed to Saudi Arabia. According to the government of Yemen, the strikes hit the airport runway to prevent the Iranian flight from landing there. The government of Yemen had earlier warned Iran against unauthorized flights to Yemen and vowed to take all necessary measures. Following the reported airstrikes on Sana'a International Airport, the Houthis announced the end of the de-escalation phase with Saudi Arabia and reportedly launched ballistic missiles against the kingdom, which were intercepted. Mr. President, we are deeply concerned about the risk of wider escalation. Yemen and the wider region cannot afford another cycle of escalation. We call on all actors to constructively engage in negotiations under United Nations auspices. Such engagement is essential to ensure de-escalation, advanced, safe, predictable, and sustainable civilian air access, among other priorities. The United Nations Special Envoy for Yemen is actively engaging with the parties and has contacted military representatives from all sides to urge de-escalation. Mr. President, the United Nations brokered a truce in April 2022, which facilitated commercial flights between Sana'a and Amman, Jordan, demonstrated that practical steps are possible when the parties negotiate in good faith and make compromises. This requires political will, constructive engagement, cooperation among the parties, and regional and international support. More recently, the parties negotiated and agreed under UN auspices in May to release over 1,600 conflict-related detainees, the largest such release agreed since the start of the conflict in Yemen. This demonstrates that mutually acceptable agreements remain achievable, even amid complex and challenging circumstances. On 11th of July, the Special Envoy for Yemen received renewed assurances from the government and the Houthis regarding their commitment to the full implementation of the deal. Mr. President, our message is clear. Unilateral measures will not bring Yemen closer to peace. On the contrary, they risk entrenching divisions, accelerating fragmentation, and heightening the danger of renewed escalation and military confrontation. We therefore continue to urge all parties to reduce tensions and address their differences through dialogue. Specifically, we call on the parties to engage constructively with the efforts of the Special Envoy, to choose dialogue over violence, and to refrain from measures that could undermine prospects for peace. We call on all to fully respect international law, including the United Nations Charter, international humanitarian law, international human rights law, and relevant resolution of this Council, and to uphold and respect the unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Yemen. The United Nations remain committed to supporting the Yemenis in restarting a political process to end the conflict in Yemen. As noted by the Special Envoy and many members of this Council in previous meetings, regional de-escalation can create a more conducive environment for reviving the Yemeni political process. In this regard, I echo the Secretary General's concern about serious escalation and renewed military confrontation in the Gulf, and call on all parties to take required steps to de-escalate. Mr. President, 73rd United Nations colleagues, as well as personnel from non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, and diplomatic missions remain in arbitrary detention by the Houthis. We again call for their immediate, safe, and unconditional release, and for full respect for international law, including the privileges and immunities of the United Nations and its personnel. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank Mr. Chiari for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Indrika Ratwete.
Mr. President, I thank SG Chiari for his briefing and for the continued efforts of colleagues to advance a political path for Yemen. Today, I want to focus on a simple but alarming reality. Yemen's humanitarian crisis is deepening, just as our ability to respond has been sharply reduced. The country is facing multiple shocks at once: worsening food insecurity, the expected impact of El Nino on food production and livelihoods, and an unprecedented fall in humanitarian funding. This is compounding the extreme fragility of the population. As the country, across the country, families are facing a daunting combination of hunger, economic decline, forced displacement, disease outbreaks, and a collapse of essential services. More than a decade into this crisis, millions of Yemenis continue to wake up each day not knowing whether they will be able to feed their children, access health care, or secure clean water. Coping mechanisms have simply been exhausted. The latest indicators paint a deeply troubling picture. Food insecurity is approaching catastrophic levels, with more than 18 million people across Yemen hungry, and many of them in an acute situation of hunger. Yemen remains one of the world's worst food security crises. It has the largest population facing global emergency levels of food insecurity, IPC Phase 4 or worse. Malnutrition continues to threaten millions of children as well as pregnant and breastfeeding women. Health facilities are struggling to function. Yemen's health system has long been severely under-resourced, even as needs continue to rise. Humanitarian partners have invested substantial efforts and resources to help the system cope. However, a chronic lack of funding is now undermining these efforts. Over the past year alone, 450 health facilities, including 76 hospitals, have closed due to the lack of resources. Families face excruciating choices, whether to buy food or medicine, whether to keep children in school or send them to work, whether to stay where they are or move again in search of safety and opportunity. Mr. President, despite extraordinary operational challenges, humanitarian partners continue to deliver assistance across Yemen. Local NGOs and Yemeni communities remain at the forefront of this effort, often operating in extremely difficult circumstances. But funding shortfalls are forcing painful choices. Programs are being cut back, services have been reduced, assistance is being limited to the most severe cases, leaving many with less support than they need or none at all. Every funding cut has a human face. It means fewer children receiving nutrition treatment. It means fewer health facilities can meet basic needs, let alone respond to emergencies. It means fewer protection services for women and girls, and it means fewer chances to prevent crises before they become catastrophic. Mr. President, Yemen's humanitarian crisis cannot be separated from the wider regional developments. Recent months have shown how quickly regional tensions can reverberate inside Yemen, notably through increased food and fuel prices that are felt first and foremost fiercely by those who can least afford them. Further escalation, whether within Yemen or across the wider region, could have immediate and dire consequences. It would mean more displacement, fewer and more expensive imports, and even tighter constraints on humanitarian access. These are just some of the risks. Yemen's people simply cannot afford another shock. The closure of Sana's international airport made life harder for already fragile communities. Of particular concern is the inability of people in areas under Houthi de facto control to travel for medical treatment. Without access to Sana'a airport, patients are forced to make long, difficult, and sometimes dangerous journeys to reach flights departing from Aden. Mr. President, allow me to conclude with 4 appeals. First, to all parties and those with influence, act with restraint and do not allow Yemen to be drawn further into regional instability. Second, to donors, this is not a moment to step back. Sustained, flexible funding is essential to keep critical services running and prevent further deterioration. Third, to this Council, keep Yemen high on the international agenda. The true cost of inaction will not be measured in percentages of funding figures, but in lost lives, opportunities denied, and a generation left behind. And lastly, to this Council, and to all with influence, advocate in the strongest possible terms for the immediate and unconditional release of all those arbitrarily detained, including our 73 UN colleagues. They are not forgotten. Mr. President, the people of Yemen have shown untold resilience, but they deserve more from us. They deserve the chance to recover, to rebuild, and to live with dignity. I thank you.
Je remercie, Monsieur.
I thank Mr. Ratwater for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. The United Kingdom called for this meeting today alongside US, France and Bahrain in support of Yemen's sovereignty and regional security. I will make 3 points. First, the United Kingdom condemns in the strongest terms today's Houthi attacks against Saudi Arabia. These attacks are reckless and unacceptable. They threaten regional security, risk further escalation, and undermine efforts to secure peace in Yemen. And we stand in full solidarity with Saudi Arabia and reaffirm our support for its security. Second, we're also deeply concerned by reports that 2 Iranian aircraft landed in Yemen on the 3rd of July and again today without permissions and clearances from the relevant Yemeni authorities. These constitute a clear breach of Yemen's sovereignty and violation of international law. The United Kingdom reaffirms its unwavering support for the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity and unity of Yemen, and all member states must respect these principles and act in accordance with their obligations under the UN Charter. If verified reports that flights may have transported military personnel, technical experts and equipment to support Houthi military capabilities would raise serious concerns and may indicate breaches of relevant Security Council resolutions including 2216 and 2140. Attempts to strengthen Houthi military capabilities are unacceptable and risk destabilizing Yemen and undermining regional stability. We urge further examination of these allegations through the appropriate UN mechanisms, including the UN panel of experts, and call on all parties to cooperate fully with those efforts. Finally, the United Kingdom stands in full solidarity with our Gulf partners, following further Iranian attacks across the region over the last 48 hours, including on Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, and Jordan, as well as on commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. We condemn these reckless actions and call for de-escalation and a return to diplomacy. President, Yemen has already endured more than a decade of conflict. The Yemeni people deserve progress towards peace, economic recovery, and stability, not actions that deepen regional tensions and increase the risk of renewed conflict. We urge the Houthis to refrain from further escalation, and we encourage the use of existing channels of dialogue to address concerns and reduce tensions. The United Kingdom remains committed to working with Council members, regional partners, and the government of Yemen to support de-escalation, to uphold relevant Security Council resolutions, and advance a durable political settlement to the conflict. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
I thank the Democratic Republic of the Congo for responding to our request to hold this meeting. And we express our appreciation to the two briefers, Mr. Khaled Khayari, Assistant Secretary General in the Departments of Political and Peace-Building Affairs and Peace Operations, and Mr. Enrique Ratwati, Acting Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator. I also welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of Yemen, His Excellency Ambassador Abdullah Saadi, in our meeting today. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain condemns the terrorist Houthi attacks against the sisterly Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And we reiterate our position of solidarity with the sisterly Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Mr. President, our meeting today is being held in extremely delicate circumstances as a result of the serious and repeated violations perpetrated by the Houthis in the Yemeni Republic with the support of Iran, which in turn spares no effort in escalating tensions in the region, especially in its continuous attacks against GCC member states and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and its continued closure of the Strait of Hormuz before maritime navigation in a clear violation of the United Nations Charter, international law, and United Nations resolutions, primarily Resolution 2817, which demanded that Iran stop using proxies. Houthi threats have expanded and include threatening to close the Straits of Bab al-Mandeb in a blatant violation of United Nations resolutions, including Resolution 2722, which in paragraph 2 called on the Houthis to immediately stop attacks that obstruct international trade and undermine navigational rights and freedoms. The Houthis continue to undermine the diplomatic efforts exerted in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2216. That resolution confirmed the need to resume the political process with the participation of all Yemeni parties in accordance with the GCC's initiative. In light of these violations, allow me to make the following observations. First, the Kingdom of Bahrain warns that any support given to the Houthis constitutes a threat to peace and security in the Republic of Yemen and the region. It undermines efforts aimed at arriving at a comprehensive political settlement in Yemen in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2216, Such support constitutes a violation of multiple UN resolutions, all of which affirm the need to abide by Yemen's unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity, most recently, Resolution 2813. Second, in light of the threats made by the Houthis against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, including the threat to target its airports and vital institutions and vessels crossing the Bab al-Mandab Strait, which constitutes a dangerous escalation that threatens the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, its security, the safety of its citizens, and its civilian infrastructure, and the stability and security of the region. In light of all this, we would like to note the statement made by the official statement on behalf of the Coalition to Support Legitimacy in Yemen, who stated that these statements are an attempt to divert attention from the Houthi violations of the Yemeni people's rights and its attempts to export the Houthis' crises, internal crises, and economic crises to Yemen's surroundings regionally. Third, the illegal and irresponsible Houthi threats to close the Bab al-Mandab Strait forces us to mention the hostile Iranian actions in the Strait of Hormuz and the way it threatens the security of sea passages, international water passages, and the security of energy and international trade. The Kingdom stresses the need to respect international law and international maritime law and to completely abide by relevant Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2817. We reiterate the need to refrain from any actions that would threaten the freedom of navigation or undermine maritime security or regional stability. Moreover, the Kingdom of Bahrain renews its condemnation of the fact that the Houthis continue to arbitrarily detain United Nations personnel and personnel working in diplomatic missions and NGOs. The Kingdom of Bahrain calls for the immediate and unconditional release of these personnel in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2813. In closing, the Kingdom of Bahrain reiterates the importance of reaching a comprehensive political settlement in the sisterly Republic of Yemen in a manner that would sustainably end the crisis and would guarantee to Yemen and its people a life of liberty and dignity and a prosperous future in an area that is stable and that is safe. We value the efforts of Mr. Hans Grunberg, the Special Envoy, in his efforts to resume the peace process. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to our briefers today. Once again, this Council is called into an emergency session to discuss the Iranian regime's efforts to threaten its neighbors in the Gulf and undermine efforts toward peace in the region. On July 3rd, an Iranian flight from Tehran arrived in Sana'a in the Houthi-controlled territory. The purpose of this flight was to ferry IRGC personnel, including drone and missile experts, in support of Houthi terrorism, under the guise of transporting Houthi officials to the late Supreme Leader's funeral. This kind of support enables the Houthis to terrorize the Yemeni people and threaten freedom of navigation in the Red Sea and surrounding waterways. We have not seen Iran attempt such outwardly brazen support for the Houthis since the 2015 aborted Mahan air flights to Sana'a. In fact, Houthi leaders publicly celebrated the recent flight as a successful evasion of international efforts to isolate the terrorist group. These actions constitute a violation of Security Council Resolution 2216. Resolution 2216 prohibits the supply, sale, or transfer of arms and related material, technical assistance, training, or other support to the Houthis related to military activities or the use of arms and related material, including drones and missiles. The United States has repeatedly called out this long-running record of violations. For nearly a decade, and with Iranian assistance, the Houthis have steadily demonstrated increasing military sophistication, including through frequent cross-border drone and missile attacks and reported use of cluster munitions. That mounting capability is in itself evidence that the Houthis have received external support in violation of the targeted arms embargo. Moreover, this morning, a second Iranian flight entered Yemen despite explicit public instructions from the Republic of Yemen government not to do so. The Islamic Republic of Iran's willful disregard for the sovereignty of Yemen and the collective decisions of this Council is simply unacceptable. Similarly, we have seen Iran's blatant disregard of Security Council Resolution 2817. With 136 co-sponsors, this resolution represents a unified international demand that Iran cease its attacks. The Iranian regime nevertheless chooses to defy Resolution 2817 with continued attacks, both directly and through its proxies, against its neighbors and maritime shipping. Last week, Iran fired unmanned aerial vehicles and missiles against 3 civilian commercial vessels transiting the Omani territorial waters in contravention of international law. These strikes had the potential to injure and kill mariners and to impose significant environmental damage. One vessel, a Qatari liquefied natural gas tanker, was left to burn and further threaten vessel traffic in the strait. Then, Saturday evening, Iran struck a container ship en route to the UAE. One Indian national remains missing. These attacks are not born of any legitimate principle. Rather, as an advisor to the Supreme Leader said Sunday, this stems from Iran's desire to unlawfully co-opt a critical waterway for use by Iran as a strategic deterrent. Beyond the maritime space, in the past week, Iran has launched UAVs and missiles against Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and the UAE. Qatar's Interior Ministry reported that 3 people, including a child, were injured by falling debris from interception operations after Iranian attacks on Sunday. These attacks are unacceptable, and they are a deliberate provocation that contradicts the diplomatic progress forged between the United States and Iran in May. The Memorandum of Understanding between the United States and Iran is based on a straightforward understanding. That is, the United States will suspend military action and that Iran will refrain from threats and the use of force. In the few weeks since the MOU signing, Iran has repeatedly defied this understanding. The United States will not unilaterally implement the MOU while Iran continues to threaten safe passage protected by the MOU. Simply put, if Iran shoots its ships, we will immediately respond with force. U.S. military operations are a response to these threats in self-defense and defense of others. Furthermore, as Secretary Rubio stressed during his trip to the region last month, the United States will continue to stand with our partners in the region. Make no mistake, this is not a talking point. It is a commitment that we will back and are backing with action. The United States stands with our partners in the Gulf, and we stand with the Republic of Yemen government against the Iranian-supported Houthi terrorist threat. We remain committed to working with Council members to use all available tools, including sanctions, to support a peaceful resolution to the conflict in Yemen and to safeguard international peace and security. And finally, we once again urge the Council to communicate to Iran unequivocally that these unambiguous actions are contrary to international law and are unacceptable. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Thank you, President. I welcome the convening of this Emergency Security Council meeting. France backed the request. I also wish to thank ASG for the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific, Mr. Khaled Kiari, as well as the ASG for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Indrika Ratwate, for their briefings. I welcome the participation in this meeting of the Permanent Representative of Yemen. Mr. President, France reaffirms its unswerving commitment to the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Yemen. By landing aircraft in Sana'a on the 3rd of July, then in Hodeidah again on the 13th of July, and this without the agreement of the legitimate authorities, Iran undermined that authority and violated international law. France firmly condemns this violation. This is not an isolated episode. It speaks to Iran's destabilizing behavior in the region, as illustrated by the resumption of clashes in the Persian Gulf since the 7th of July, as well as the announcement of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. These actions must end immediately and definitively. By supporting the Houthis, Tehran is posing a threat to international peace and security. It is also violating Security Council resolutions by breaching its obligations to uphold the arms embargo introduced by Resolution 2216 in 2015 and extended to the Houthis as an entity by Resolution 2624 in 2022. France expects that Iran will fully comply with its international obligations and put an end to all transfers of military equipment for the benefit of the Houthis. Mr. President, France demands the cessation of destabilizing actions by the Houthis. They are once again threatening Saudi Arabia. France reiterates our solidarity with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They are also threatening Israel-linked vessels in the Red Sea. They should stop these plans. France recalls the need to uphold maritime safety and the freedom of navigation, which the Council demanded in its Resolution 2722 in 2024. France will continue its commitment to the EU operation EUNAVFOR Aspides with full respect for international law, adopting a strictly defensive posture, and this together with our European and international partners. In addition, there are the persistent and deliberate impediments to humanitarian action. France demands the immediate and unconditional release of all UN personnel, as well as of NGO workers and diplomatic mission staff who are arbitrarily being detained by the Houthis. These detentions, much like attacks on humanitarian personnel, are unacceptable and at odds both with the international humanitarian law as well as Resolution 2730 of 2024, not to mention international human rights law. They impede the delivery of assistance which the civilian population sorely needs. Women and children are paying the price. And the ASG just reminded us of that. Mr. President, there cannot be a military solution to the conflict in Yemen. This is why France fully supports the work of the Special Envoy, Mr. Hans Grunberg. The recent prisoner release agreement announced on the 14th of May is a step in the right direction. We call for it to be implemented without delay. Only an inclusive political process under UN auspices involving women and the entire society of Yemen can over time put an end to this crisis. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we thank ASG, Mr. Khaled Kiari, as well as the acting ASG for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mr. Indrika Ratwata, for their briefings. The problem raised by the Permanent Representative of Yemen in his 6th July letter is a symptom of the unresolved conflict in Yemen. Genuinely active actions are overdue, actions which would allow for the rebuilding of trust between the parties, which would allow us to resolve pressing humanitarian issues, including the lifting of the Air and Sea blockade. It's an open secret that Sana'a Airport is of utmost importance for the residents of the densely populated provinces of Yemen. If we take Sana'a and its outskirts alone, it is home to roughly 10% of the population of Yemen. An airport that functions uninterrupted is of vital necessity for all of these people, for business trips, medical travel, pilgrimages, and for them to be able to maintain ties with relatives living abroad. Nor should we forget about the important role the airport could play in providing logistical support for humanitarian operations in Yemen. This matter has been discussed in this chamber on many occasions. The Mahan air flight on 3rd of July should have been agreed with the official authorities. Nevertheless, we believe it's important to take note of the fact that this was a strictly humanitarian flight. We do not see this incident bringing about either human casualties nor any material damage, although it did result to an escalation in Yemen and in the region. This is particularly dangerous given the escalation we're seeing in the Persian Gulf. We call on all parties to reduce tensions, to exercise restraint, and we also call on them to partake in dialogue so as to settle their differences. We also call on the special envoy of the Secretary General, Mr. Hans Grunberg, to immediately join these efforts as part of his mandate. Mr. President, the Russian Federation has unswervingly supported and continues to support the full lifting of the sea, air, and land blockade on Yemen, much like we've supported an end to all restrictions on supplies of foodstuffs, medicines, and other basic necessities. And this in all districts of this Arab country without exception. This is necessary, inter alia, to improve the disastrous humanitarian situation in Yemen, which is already being complicated due to the outbreaks of hunger as well as infectious disease epidemics. And this against the backdrop of the dearth of basic necessities and the fact that the national health system is teetering on the brink of collapse. The situation is exacerbated by the hitherto unresolved issue of the detention of UN and humanitarian workers. Almost 20 million people in Yemen require humanitarian assistance to be provided on a depoliticized and non-discriminatory basis. Mr. President, the chronically unresolved nature of the Yemeni crisis, now well into its second decade, is fertile ground for such problem situations arising. It heightens the risks of escalation on land and in the air, something we're seeing today. We call on all parties to recognize this and, going forward, to abstain from any unilateral steps which could result in the uncontrolled collapse of the situation, not just in Yemen, but in the Middle East as a whole, and this especially given the escalation we've seen over the last few months. We must acknowledge the fact that the only path to peace and stability in Yemen lies in direct and frank dialogue involving all of the leading political forces in the country, including the Houthis, with due regard for the fair interests of all the parties. We underscore that what is long overdue is the intensification of mediation under UN auspices, led by Special Envoy Hans Grunberg, and with the active participation of the vast number of Yemen's neighbors, including Saudi Arabia and Iran. This will be possible once the Yemeni parties sign a relevant roadmap. A roadmap which has been on the table since late 2023. We'd also like to remind you about the need to think long and hard about a renewal of the international legal framework for settling the Yemeni crisis, something that's the current framework having lost relevance. This includes Security Council Resolution 2216. We underscore our commitment to the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Yemen. Mr. President, without a doubt, we must factor in the broader regional context. We'd like to underscore the fact that there is no other game in town. There is only the political and diplomatic path towards the settlement of the escalation prompted by the US and Israeli aggression against Iran. We hope that negotiations will continue building on agreements entered into by Washington and Tehran with the assistance of Pakistan, Qatar, and other countries in the region as part of the Islamabad Memorandum. We call on Security Council members to concentrate on creating conditions conducive to diplomatic efforts, as well as to abstain from making any sudden moves, as well as from issuing assessments that are not objective. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Assistant Secretary General DPPA, Mr. Chiari, and Acting Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Ratwate, for the briefings. I also welcome the participation of the permanent representative of Yemen in the meeting. Yemen is once again at dangerous crossroads, posing serious challenges to regional peace, security, and stability. Houthi threats against maritime and aviation security, including explicit threats of force against neighboring countries, are not empty rhetoric. They are a direct assault on regional stability, and we condemn them without reservation. Our message remains clear and consistent. Yemen's sovereignty, territorial integrity, unity, and independence must be fully respected, including Yemen's national airspace in accordance with international law. We call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint, refrain from any actions that threaten Yemen's sovereignty, and to support efforts of de-escalation, peace, and stability in the country, not as a talking point, but as an operational necessity. Mr. President, there is no military solution to the crisis, as previous speakers have stated. Only a comprehensive, inclusive, and sustainable political solution, including security guarantees for the Red Sea region, remains the only viable path toward lasting peace in Yemen. We reaffirm our strong support for the efforts of the UN Special Envoy Hans Grunberg to facilitate an inclusive Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political process under the auspices of the United Nations, conducted in full respect of Yemen's sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence, and unity. Maritime security in the Red Sea region needs to be an integral part of this process. Let us be clear what is at stake. Freedom of navigation in the Red Sea is not a regional convenience. It is a global lifeline. International maritime routes must remain open, safe, and secure, and commercial shipping must be protected at all times in accordance with international law. Sanctions enforcement is not optional. The importance of full compliance with the relevant UN Security Council resolutions and the existing UN sanctions regime, including the targeted arms embargo against the Houthis established under Security Council Resolution 2216 and subsequent relevant resolutions, remains vital. Attempts to circumvent the arms embargo undermine every diplomatic effort underway. We call on all members to assure its full, effective, and consistent implementation. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3, namely the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Liberia, and my own country, Somalia. We thank ASG Chiari and OCHA acting ASG Ratwate for their comprehensive briefing. We also welcome the participation of the permanent representative of Yemen in this meeting. Mr. President, we take note of the letter dated July 6th of 2026 from the government of Yemen to the Security Council requesting an emergency meeting. In this regard, the A3 would like to highlight the following. First, the A3 reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Yemen. These principles, enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, must be respected by all. We stress that all external action that infringes on Yemen's sovereignty or risks expanding the conflict must not be tolerated. insulating Yemen from the broader conflict unfolding in the Middle East is essential to regional and international peace and security. Second, we are deeply concerned by the renewed tensions in Yemen and the recent attacks near the port of Hodeidah. The hostilities only prolong the conflict and undermine ongoing efforts toward the negotiated settlement. We call on all parties to de-escalate and engage constructively under the United Nations-led political process. The A3 reaffirms its firm support for the efforts of the Special Envoy and for the United Nations-led mediation process aimed at achieving a comprehensive, inclusive, and sustainable political settlement. A lasting resolution can only be achieved through an inclusive Yemeni-led and a Yemeni-owned political process. Third, the humanitarian crisis in Yemen is reaching an alarming breaking point. As the country enters the peak lean season, millions continue to depend on humanitarian assistance and protection services, even while funding constraints continue to place significant pressure on the humanitarian operations. The A3 calls on the international community to maintain and increase predictable funding. Furthermore, we remain deeply concerned by the continued detention of the United Nations personnel, humanitarian workers, NGO staff, civil society representatives, and personnel associated with diplomatic missions by the Houthis. We reiterate our call for the immediate, safe, and unconditional release of all those detained. At the same time, we welcome the recent UN-brokered agreement to release over 1,600 detainees and encourage efforts to build on this positive momentum toward its full implementation. In closing, Mr. President, the A3 supports the legitimate aspirations of the Yemeni people and underscores that the path towards lasting peace lies through dialogue, compromise, and sustained political engagement. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank ASG Chiari and Acting ASG Ratwati for their briefings, and welcome the permanent representative of Yemen to this meeting. China has taken note of the letter dated July the 6th from the PR of Yemen to the Council's President, as well as the relevant reports, and is deeply concerned about the escalations relating to Sana'a International Airport. We have all along maintained that the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of all countries in the Middle East and the Gulf region, including Yemen, should be respected, that the purposes and principles of the UN Charter be upheld, and that civilians, humanitarian workers, and civilian targets be protected. We call on all parties concerned to stay calm and exercise restraint to avoid further escalation of the situation. President, the issue of Yemen is closely linked with the overall situation in the Middle East. With the current situation in the Middle East remaining tense, the international community must strengthen unity and collaboration, forge synergy to promote peace, and jointly safeguard the peace process in the Middle East. I will highlight 3 points. First, maximum restraint must be exercised to avoid escalation. Recently, tensions in the Middle East have further escalated. The ceasefire agreement between the United States and Iran are under challenge. This is deeply worrisome. Another flare-up of the flames of war serves no one's interests. Military means will not bring any solution. The US and Iran must implement in real earnest the MOU they have signed, refrain from threatening rhetoric or resort to force, and end without delay the warring activities and conflicts that should not have occurred. All parties involved in the issue of Yemen should refrain from any action that might escalate the situation or jeopardize mutual trust to prevent new conflicts from taking place. In Gaza, peace is yet to be truly achieved. The ceasefire agreement must be fully observed. China welcomes the ceasefire reached between Lebanon and Israel and urges all relevant parties to immediately cease hostilities. Second, dialogue and consultations must be advanced to peacefully settle differences.
All parties must respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, respect each other's right to survival and development, respect each other's legitimate security concerns, and adhere to dialogue and negotiations to resolve disputes. China calls on the U.S. and Iran to resume follow-up negotiations as soon as possible and to reach a comprehensive agreement that is agreed upon by both sides, accepted by regional countries, and welcomed by the international community. The Strait of Hormuz is a strait used for international navigation. Restoring safe and free passage in the strait without delay serves the interests of all parties. The issue of navigation through the strait must be properly addressed, with a view to properly responding to the common concerns of the international community. The Yemeni government and the Houthis should fully implement the prisoner exchange agreement that has been reached, gradually build mutual trust, relaunch the peace process in Yemen, and start national reconstruction. The detained UN personnel must be released immediately. The international community must further enhance humanitarian assistance to Yemen. Countries in the region should create an enabling environment for this purpose and play a constructive role in this regard. Third, peaceful coexistence must be adhered to and common security be built. Countries in the Middle East and the Gulf region are closely interdependent like lips and teeth, and are neighbors who cannot be moved away. History has repeatedly proven that wars and conflicts bring no winners and that peaceful coexistence is the only correct path. The international community should respect the history and cultural conditions of the Middle East, support region countries in maintaining strategic autonomy and improving mutual relations, to replace confrontation with cooperation, resolve long-standing grievances through reconciliation, and promote a common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security architecture in the Middle East and the Gulf region, so that the region can completely break free from the historical fate of repeated conflicts and truly achieve lasting peace. President, China has always been a builder of peace, a promoter of stability, and a contributor to development in the Middle East. We will uphold the 4 propositions put forward by President Xi Jinping on maintaining and promoting peace and stability in the Middle East, work together with all parties, and make unremitting efforts to find a political solution to the hotspot issues in the Middle East and achieve lasting peace and stability in the region. Thank you, President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama. Thank you, Mr. President. We thank you for convening this meeting, since the events that we are discussing warrant the immediate attention of this Council. Likewise, we thank the Assistant Secretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Mr. Khalid Hiari, and the Acting Assistant General for Humanitarian Affairs of the Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Indrika Ratwate. We thank them for their valuable briefings. The violation of the airspace of the Republic of Yemen constitutes an unacceptable violation of its sovereignty, its political independence, and its territorial integrity, as well as a grave provocation. This incident, which occurred over Sana'a, the country's capital, which is currently under the de facto control of the Houthi group, demonstrates the disregard of the action of this group, which seems willing to sacrifice the peace and well-being of the Yemeni people. In addition, we reject the interference of the Islamic Republic of Iran, since it is contrary to international law. This incident compounds a worrisome regional trend, which is the increasing recurrence to attacks against neighboring countries and interference of third parties in conflicts, which threatens to entrench instability and to consolidate an increasingly insecure environment across the region. All of these developments are particularly worrisome at a time at which the hopeful yet still fragile memorandum of understanding with the United States is facing considerable challenges. President, furthermore, we are concerned by the grave humanitarian crisis which is threatening to affect a significant proportion of the Yemeni population with starvation, which was highlighted in Mr. Ratwate's briefing. Mr. President, we cannot overlook the attacks on commercial vessels and shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, including Panamanian flagged ships, which continue to affect safety of international navigation. Furthermore, we express our concern at the risk of a resumption of attacks on merchant vessels in the Red Sea, given the serious consequences that such attacks have previously had on the global economy. In the current context in which the main maritime routes are facing mounting challenges, any additional interruption to or deterioration of the security of another strategic waterway would have far-reaching repercussions. We reiterate that freedom of navigation and safe transit passage through international maritime routes should be respected at all times, in accordance with international law and the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Thank you very much. I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank Assistant Secretary General Chiari and Acting Assistant Secretary General Watwati for their briefings and welcome the permanent representative of Yemen to this meeting. Denmark notes with concern Yemen's letter dated 6 July, in which it references serious violations committed by Iran against the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of Yemen. Denmark condemns Iran's support to proxies in the region, including to the Houthis in Yemen, and demand that Iran cease from any provocation or threat to countries in the region. In light of today's reported strikes against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we express our full solidarity with the Kingdom, as we do with all Gulf states, as they face Iran's and its proxies' destabilizing actions and attacks. We underscore the need for full adherence to international law and UN Security Council resolutions, including respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Yemen. Iran's destabilizing actions have been negatively impacting the Middle East for too long. We strongly urge the Houthis and Iran to refrain from dragging Yemen into a broader conflict. Any further escalations or threats would only heighten tensions in an already volatile region and jeopardize steps made towards stability. Mr. President, the most viable pathway to peace and stability in Yemen has long been and remains through negotiations and an inclusive political process under UN auspices. Denmark fully supports the efforts of Special Envoy Grunberg to facilitate dialogue between the parties to this end. We welcome the recent agreement between the government in Yemen and the Houthis to release over 1,600 conflict-related detainees. This demonstrates that progress can be made through dialogue and diplomacy. We urge the parties to intensify their efforts to complete the outstanding technical and operational preparations as soon as possible to ensure the safe and timely release of the detainees. However, for more than 2 years, the Houthis have been arbitrarily detaining personnel from the UN, NGOs, civil society, and diplomatic missions. Denmark strongly condemns these ongoing detentions, and we reiterate our demand on the Houthis for their immediate and unconditional release. As a result of these actions by the Houthis, the UN has had to reassess its direct operations in areas suffering severe humanitarian crisis. Some NGOs continue to persevere on the ground, showing extraordinary courage and commitment. Civilian infrastructure, such as airports and seaports, must be protected, particularly to allow for the timely delivery of humanitarian aid in Yemen. But, as we heard from OCHA both last month and now again today, less access, less presence, and less funding mean less food, less medicine, and fewer lives saved. If nothing changes, hunger will deepen. Suffering will grow. More lives will be lost, and misery and despair will continue. We are also deeply concerned by the recent escalation in Hodeidah, which has led to many casualties in recent days. We call for urgent de-escalation and dialogue. In closing, we once again urge the Houthis to prioritize the well-being of the Yemeni people, to immediately release those detained, avoid escalating tensions, and engage in sincere peace efforts, led by Special Envoy Grunberg and his team, with the government of Yemen to bring about a sustainable and lasting peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark. I now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President.
I thank the Assistant Secretary General Khalid Kari and OCHA Acting Assistant Secretary General Ratwate for their updates, and I welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of Yemen in today's meeting. Mr. President, Iranian civilian aircraft reportedly entering into Yemeni airspace and subsequently landing at Sana'a International Airport, followed by similar landing in Hodeidah today, on Yemeni sovereign territory without the authorization of the internationally recognized government of Yemen, represents a flagrant violation of the sovereignty of the Republic of Yemen and blatant challenge to international law and relevant resolutions of this Council. Such actions are contrary to the principles that are essential to the security of all UN member states. Respect for sovereignty is not optional. It is the cornerstone of the Charter of the United Nations. Unfortunately, these actions by Iran demonstrate a deliberate pattern of conduct that undermines international peace and security. Iran has failed to meet its binding non-proliferation obligations, instead continuing its efforts to destabilize the wider region. Iran continues to threaten its neighboring states and has repeatedly targeted their civilian infrastructure with unprovoked strikes, including strikes carried out well after the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding on the cessation of hostilities, which this Council thoroughly condemned at our meeting just 2 weeks ago. Iran has also continued its attempt to hold an international waterway hostage, clear violation of United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Not only is Iran purposefully risking the energy and food security of the world, it is also demonstrating its unlawful intent through continued threats and strikes against commercial shipping. Moreover, Latvia is deeply concerned by Iran's continued support for the Houthis, including the transfer of weapons, military technology, and other forms of assistance in violation of the Security Council's resolutions, as repeatedly documented by the panel of experts of the 2140 Sanctions Committee. Iran's support continues to undermine peace efforts in Yemen, fuel regional instability, and enable attacks against international shipping and neighboring states. We call on Iran to fully comply with its obligations under relevant Security Council resolutions and to refrain from any action that could further undermine efforts toward a comprehensive political settlement in Yemen. We further unequivocally condemn the Houthis' continued threats to freedom of navigation, destabilizing actions against its neighbors, detention of UN and humanitarian personnel, and their persistent disregard for efforts to advance peaceful resolution to the conflict in Yemen. The people of Yemen have endured years of devastating conflict and humanitarian suffering. They have borne the greatest burden of this crisis, and any further prolongation of instability will continue to fall primarily on their shoulders. And in the light of the latest developments, we call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint, de-escalate tensions, and refrain from actions that could further aggravate the situation. Mr. President, Yemenis deserve peace, stability, and the restoration of effective sovereign governance across the entire country. This can only be achieved through inclusive, Yemeni-owned, Yemeni-led, and UN-facilitated political process. And I would like to once again reaffirm Latvia's support for the unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Yemen, and our strong support for the efforts of Special Envoy Grunberg. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank ASG Khalid Khayari and Acting ASG Indrika Ratwate for their briefings. At the outset, Pakistan strongly condemns the Houthi ballistic missile attacks against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We express our full solidarity with the brotherly kingdom and reaffirm our steadfast support for its security, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. We also reaffirm our unwavering commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Yemen, consistent with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and international law. At a time when the region continues to face heightened tensions and multiple interconnected crises, we call on the concerned parties to resolve differences through dialogue, diplomacy, and a steadfast commitment to de-escalation. A comprehensive inclusive and sustainable peace can only be achieved through a Yemeni-led and Yemeni-owned political process facilitated by the UN, which addresses the legitimate aspirations and concerns of all Yemenis. The agreement on the exchange of prisoners earlier this year demonstrates that dialogue can yield tangible outcomes even in a difficult environment. All parties should build on this momentum and continue engaging constructively towards a durable nationwide ceasefire and an inclusive political settlement. Mr. President, the Yemeni people have endured years of conflict, displacement, economic hardship, food insecurity, and the collapse of essential services. Any further escalation risks undermining prospects for peace and deepening the suffering of civilians. Pakistan reiterates its strong condemnation of the continued arbitrary detention of UN, humanitarian personnel, and diplomatic staff, as well as the unlawful seizure of UN premises and assets by the Houthis. These actions contravene international law and undermine humanitarian work. We call for the immediate and unconditional release of all detained personnel and for full respect for the privileges and immunities of UN personnel, facilities, and assets. President, Pakistan remains firmly committed to promoting dialogue, diplomacy, and regional de-escalation. We encourage all concerned parties to maintain channels of communication, avoid actions that could heighten tensions, and pursue peaceful resolution of disputes in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. Pakistan will continue to support all sincere efforts aimed at fostering peace, stability, and mutual understanding in the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Mr. Khaled Khiari and Mr. Indrika Ratwate for the briefings that they've shared, and I welcome here the permanent representative of Yemen. Colombia reaffirms its support for the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Yemen. Any action affecting the sovereignty of the Yemeni state or the legitimate exercise of its authority over its territory, including its airspace and borders, warrants close consideration in strict accordance with international law and the relevant resolutions of the Security Council. In this regard, Colombia reiterates that all states have an obligation to act in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, whose principles and provisions cannot be applied selectively. Rather, they represent legal obligations that are binding equally on all states and that further represent the foundation of the international order. Consequently, it's important to shed full light on the circumstances surrounding the incident that we are discussing today. It falls to the Council to act on the basis of verifiable information and with a thorough understanding of the facts. In this context, we encourage all parties to cooperate constructively and in good faith with the relevant bodies, thereby contributing to a careful, objective, and de-escalatory response. In the current regional context marked by multiple hotbeds of tension, any action which might be perceived as provocative runs the risk of exacerbating existing tensions. Colombia appeals to all the parties to demonstrate the utmost responsibility and restraint. The priority must be to prevent a fresh escalation which might compromise regional stability. Additionally, it is essential to preserve the progress made since the 2022 truce, which contributed considerably to curbing levels of violence and created spaces for dialogue. Although the political process continues to face considerable challenges, the progress made must not be jeopardized. The parties must refrain from taking measures which could undermine trust, erode the negotiating environment, or reverse the progress made over the last few years. To conclude, Colombia reiterates the importance of the international community supporting efforts aimed at achieving a sustainable political solution. It is more necessary than ever to act responsibly and refrain from any action which could adversely affect Yemen's sovereignty, the integrity of the political process, or the prospects for a lasting peace in the country. Thank you very much.
Je remercie la représentante.
I thank the representative of Colombia for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Yemen.
Mr. President, at the outset, I congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Security Council this month. We wish you all success in carrying out your duties. I also extend my thanks to your predecessor, the permanent representative of the Republic of Colombia, for her successful leadership of the Council last month. I thank Mr. Khaled Khiari and Mr. Enrica Ratuate for their valuable briefings. Mr. President, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to you for responding to the request of the government of the Republic of Yemen to convene this emergency session. I also thank all members of the Council for their attention to these serious developments, which not only affect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of Yemen, but also constitute a real test of the principles upon which the international system is founded. Most notably, the respect for the sovereignty of states, non-interference in their internal affairs, adherence to the Charter of the UN, and the implementation of Security Council resolutions. Mr. President, the Republic of Yemen did not request this session merely to discuss the operation of an unauthorized flight by a UN member state. Rather, what occurred constitutes an extremely dangerous precedent in the Yemeni situation and raises the question of whether this Council is able to protect the rules of the international system and preserve international peace and security. The issue before us today is not only about a member state's right to manage its airspace. We are dealing here with a deliberate attempt to impose a fait accompli that bypasses the legitimate government, defies Security Council resolutions, tests the international sanctions regime, and turns civil aviation into a tool to achieve military and political objectives that are inconsistent with international law. We warn of the use of Sana's airport, which is not under the administration of the legitimate Yemeni government, to receive unauthorized flights. This is not only a violation of the sovereignty of the Republic of Yemen, but also creates a dangerous precedent that could embolden other armed groups to exploit civilian facilities outside the control of legitimate governments, that would undermine the credibility of the international system and undermine efforts to maintain international peace and security. Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran operated a direct flight by Mahan Air to Sana's airport, which is under the forcible control of the Houthi terrorist militias. This cannot be viewed as a humanitarian measure, as propagated by the militias. Rather, it represents a grave violation of the sovereignty of the Republic of Yemen, a direct defiance to relevant Security Council resolutions, and particularly to the sanctions measures imposed on the militias. This flight cannot be regarded as an ordinary civilian flight because it was conducted without prior permission from or coordination with the competent authorities of the Republic of Yemen. This is inconsistent with the rules governing the operation of international flights to the territory of a sovereign state. Documented information available to the Yemeni government indicate that the flight was not purely civilian in nature. The flight carried personnel know-how and military and dual-use equipment. The Yemeni government reserves the right to submit the information and evidence in its possession to the Sanctions Committee and the panel of experts on Yemen for the necessary action within their mandates. Furthermore, the operating company, Mahan Air, is not an ordinary commercial airline. Over the past years, it has been associated with providing logistical support to Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps and has been subjected to sanctions by certain countries due to activities related to the transport of personnel and military equipment to a number of conflict zones. The danger of this incident lies not only in the details of the flight itself, but in the political message it sought to send. It was an attempt to impose a new reality that bypasses Yemeni state institutions. This incident was meant to test the will of the international community to enforce its decisions. It was meant to send the wrong message that armed groups can, with external support, circumvent international legitimacy without accountability or consequences. Mr. President, it is important to emphasize that the Yemeni government has never treated Sana's airport as a tool in a political conflict, but rather as a civilian facility that should remain in the service of all Yemenis. On this basis, the government has sought to ensure the continuation of civilian flights through the official national carrier of the Republic of Yemen, whenever the safety of the aircraft and their crews were guaranteed. We sought to ensure the respect for the independence of the national carrier. We sought to ensure the release of its assets arbitrarily seized by the militias. We sought to prevent the use of the airport for military or political purposes serving the Houthi militias and their supporters. Attempts to portray the unlawful Iranian flights as a response to humanitarian considerations are merely attempts to conceal a very different reality, namely the use of Sana's airport as a platform to entrench Iranian influence, to undermine Yemeni state institutions, and to circumvent international resolutions. There is dangerous evidence proving that this was not a humanitarian measure, but rather a systematic policy aimed at testing the will of the international community. Today, with the support of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Houthi militias proceeded to operate a second unauthorized flight to Sana's airport. Despite the clear warnings issued by the Yemeni government and despite the international community's concern regarding this issue, this is a new challenge to the sovereignty of the Republic of Yemen and the binding resolutions of the Security Council. In response to this escalation, the Yemeni government fulfilled its constitutional and legal duty to protect its airspace. The armed forces took the necessary defensive measures to prevent the imposition of this fait accompli, while affirming their full readiness to protect national sovereignty and enforce the law. However, after completing military security and political assessments, the Yemeni government chose not to expand the scope of the confrontation based on its responsibility to protect civilian lives and safeguard national interests, and in order not to provide the militias and their supporters with the opportunity to drag Yemen into a broader regional conflict that serves only the agendas of their backers. We have taken measures that any member state of the United Nations would have taken if its airspace were violated and if a fait accompli was imposed upon its sovereignty. So the real question that should be asked is not why does the government reject an unauthorized Iranian flight? Rather, if the objective is humanitarian, as the Houthis claim, why do they insist on destroying the capabilities of Yemen's national carrier? Why are they insisting on obstructing its role and resorting to a foreign company whose name has been associated with activities supporting Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps? The answer to this question clearly reveals the true nature of this attempt and confirms that its purpose was not to serve Yemenis, but to impose a new political and security reality that is inconsistent with the sovereignty of the Republic of Yemen and Security Council resolutions. Mr. President, Despite the gravity of these challenges, the Yemeni government has never abandoned the option of peace. It has made peace a strategic choice to end the suffering of the Yemeni people and to restore security and stability in our country and the region. For this reason, over the past years, the government has participated in good faith in all UN-led efforts and has engaged positively with various regional and international initiatives, as we are firmly convinced that a just and lasting peace can only be achieved through a political settlement grounded in the agreed upon terms of references, most notably the GCC initiative and its implementation mechanism, the outcomes of the National Dialogue Conference and Security Council resolutions, particularly Resolution 2216. In this context, the Yemeni government supported the efforts led by our brethren in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Sultanate of Oman. We participated responsibly in the consultations that resulted in the roadmap proposal. We have accepted the roadmap as we believe that it is necessary to give peace every possible opportunity. However, after participating in those consultations, the Houthi militias chose to renege on their commitments in favor of cross-border military escalation, in service of external agendas well known to all. This deepened the crisis of trust and once again confirmed that these militias continue to view peace as a temporary tactic rather than a strategic choice to end the suffering of Yemenis. Mr. President, these two incidents cannot be separated from the broader pattern of conduct by the Houthi militias. They undermine peace efforts, obstruct confidence-building measures. They refuse to implement agreements reached under UN auspices. While the Yemeni government had completed all necessary procedures to implement the latest agreement on the exchange of detainees and abductees under the auspices of the UN and the ICRC, we were surprised to receive official notification from both sponsoring parties that the Houthi militias had refused to implement the agreement on the scheduled date and had postponed it indefinitely. This is a move that reflects their continued exploitation of this humanitarian file for political and military gains at the expense of thousands of Yemeni families. Simultaneously, the Houthi militias continue to detain UN staff and humanitarian workers. They continue to impose taxes, undermine the national economy, suppress citizens, thereby deepening the humanitarian crisis. They do use the suffering of Yemenis as a tool of political and military blackmail instead of working to end it. Mr. President, as the government of the Republic of Yemen presents these developments before your esteemed Council, we look forward to a clear and firm stance consistent with the Council responsibilities to maintain international peace and security. We call upon the Security Council to do the following. First, the Council must explicitly condemn the unauthorized Iranian flight to Sana's airport as a violation of the sovereignty of the Republic of Yemen and a direct challenge to relevant Security Council resolutions. Second, the Council must call upon the Islamic Republic of Iran to refrain from operating any flights to Yemeni airports without the approval of the legitimate government and to cease all forms of interference in the internal affairs of the Republic of Yemen. Third, the Council must urge all member states to refrain from granting overflight permissions and refrain from facilitating flights destined for Yemeni airports or entry points that are not under the control of the Yemeni government, unless such flights are coordinated with and authorized by the competent authorities of the Republic of Yemen. Fourth, the Security Council must task the Sanctions Committee and the panel of experts on Yemen with investigating the Iranian flight to Sana's airport and examining whether it involved the transfer of personnel, equipment, or technologies in violation of the arms embargo and sanctions regime established pursuant to relevant Security Council resolutions. Fifth, the Council must strictly enforce Security Council resolutions on Yemen, particularly resolutions 2140 and 2216. It must strengthen mechanisms to prevent the smuggling of weapons, experts, and military or dual-use equipment to the Houthi militias, to the Houthi terrorist militias. 6. The Council must continue to support the Yemeni government to restore state institutions, to end the coup, to achieve a comprehensive, just, and sustainable peace in accordance with the terms of reference agreed upon regionally and internationally, to protect regional security and international maritime routes. The government of the Republic of Yemen reserves its full right to take all legitimate political, diplomatic, and legal measures guaranteed under international law and the Charter of the UN to safeguard its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national security. Mr. President, the Republic of Yemen is not hostile towards the Iranian people, nor does it view its relations with peoples through the lens of political conflicts. Rather, it rejects policies based on supporting armed groups, undermining state institutions, and interfering in the internal affairs of states, in clear violation of the principles of good neighborliness and the Charter of the UN. Over the years of the crisis, Iranian support for the Houthi militias has not been focusing on peace prospects or supporting state institutions or alleviating the suffering of the Yemeni people. Instead, it has prolonged suffering, undermined state institutions, deepened societal divisions, threatened civil peace, and enhanced the military capabilities of the militias. This adversely affected Yemeni security, regional stability, and the security of international waterways. By contrast, the government of the Republic of Yemen values the fraternal support provided by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in supporting state institutions, the national economy, humanitarian and development projects, and political efforts aimed at ending the war and achieving peace. This shows the fundamental difference between those who invest in state institutions and stability and those who support militias and perpetuate the conflict. Mr. President, what we present before your esteemed Council today is a real test of the international system's ability to protect the principles upon which it was founded, most notably the respect of states' sovereignty, implementation of Security Council resolutions, preventing armed groups and their supporters from imposing new realities outside the framework of international legitimacy. Ignoring this incident or treating it merely as an isolated event would not affect only the Republic of Yemen. It would also send the wrong message to armed groups and their supporters around the world that violating state sovereignty, using civil aviation as a cover for military or logistical activities, and circumventing Security Council resolutions can occur without accountability or consequences. Therefore, the position taken by the Security Council today would go beyond defending the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of Yemen. It would defend a fundamental principle upon which the international system is based, that state sovereignty may not be violated and that Security Council resolutions may not be tested or circumvented without accountability. The Yemeni people, who has made immense sacrifices to defend their state and achieve peace and stability, looks to the Security Council to fulfill its full responsibility in protecting international legitimacy, enforcing its resolutions, and confronting any attempts aimed at undermining them or imposing realities by force outside the framework of international law. I thank you, Mr. President. أشكر ممثلة اليمن على
I thank Yemen for that statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers.